Hello, my name's Harlow. Last Christmas, my family told the front desk I was housekeeping, then put me in a moldy room by the dumpsters. They smiled through it, like it was funny, like I was nobody. What they didn't know was, I owned the place. They laughed at me during dinner, cut me out of the family photo, then applauded a speech my sister stole from my journal. And I stayed quiet. Why? Because sometimes silence isn't weakness, it's a setup. Have you ever realized your own family was rewriting your story without you? And what would you do when it's your turn to speak? I was sipping lukewarm coffee in my small but tidy kitchen when the family group chat pinged for the third time that morning. I didn't rush to check it. These messages always came in waves before every Carter gathering. Wedding, funeral, birthday, it didn't matter the occasion. There was always a flurry of activity, mostly from my sister, Isolde, who could coordinate a cross-country gala with one hand while sipping Chardonnay with the other. When I finally opened the thread, it took me less than 10 seconds to see what was missing. My name, not once, not even as a courtesy tag. There it was. Carter Family Christmas Retreat, Deck 2023 at Emerald Peaks Resort. Followed by lines of excited emojis, snowflakes, champagne flutes. Isolde's message sat at the top. Everything's booked. Olivia arranged the group rate. I'll handle the schedule. Let me know if anyone needs gear or travel tips. Then came the part that made me tilt my head, not in surprise, but in something closer to amusement. We'll cover for anyone who needs help, even Harlow. Even Harlow. I set the phone down without responding. No one had texted me directly. No call, no message. Just a passive mention in a 20-person thread, as if I were the distant cousin they'd rather not claim but couldn't legally erase. Typical. The thing is, I hadn't been part of the inner Carter circle in years. Not since I was the kid sister too quiet to matter, then the adult sibling too blue-collar to include. They made sure I knew my place every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, every moment I tried to step forward. I scrolled through the photos Isolde had sent, resort images that were polished, elegant, absurdly curated, mountain views bathed in twilight, fireside lounges with leather seating and whiskey tastings. I recognized every corner. Because I owned it, Emerald Peaks was mine. They just didn't know. I had purchased the struggling resort 2 years ago under a holding company. No one in the family could trace back to me. It had taken years of work, long nights, silent flights, deals signed under names I didn't use outside the boardroom. And now, here we were. They had unknowingly booked their grand reunion at my flagship location. I could have laughed. I didn't. I felt still, almost like fate was asking if I was ready. And maybe, for once, I was. But that wasn't the only reminder that blood didn't always mean bond. My thoughts wandered back to the gift. My mother's birthday had been 2 months earlier. I'd spent weeks commissioning a leather-bound photo book of family history, scanned photos from before I was born, handwritten captions, archival prints. I had it delivered anonymously, not because I wanted to be secretive, but because I wanted the gesture to speak louder than my name ever did. But during the birthday brunch, Isolde had handed the book to Mom with a proud grin. "I had this made just for you," she said, her voice syrupy, her fingers grazing the gold-pressed cover. Mom had gasped, placing a hand over her heart. "Oh, Isolde, you always think of everything." I stood in the corner, glass in hand, nodding like everyone else. I never corrected her, never said a word. Maybe I didn't expect to be credited. Maybe I didn't think it mattered anymore. But watching Isolde soak in the praise, while my mother's eyes shone with pride, something inside me didn't just hurt, it hardened. They say silence is strength. Sometimes it's survival. Later that night, long after the group chat faded into its usual haze of shared itineraries and emoji-laced plans, I opened my email and typed a quick note to Elian, my general manager. Approve the Carter booking. Ensure they're well taken care of. Full experience, no discounts. He responded within minutes. You want them to know? I stared at the blinking cursor before typing back. No. Let them figure it out when the time's right. I booked my own flight under my maiden name, not because I was hiding, but because I wanted to arrive unseen. I would walk in through the service entrance like every staff member, carry my own bag, wear flats, not heels. No one would know who I was, at least, not yet. They'd chosen to forget me. Let's see what they do when they realize I've been watching them this whole time. I arrived the day before anyone else. Early enough that the sky still wore that steel gray hue only winter mornings could manage, half promise, half warning. My coat trailed a thin line of snow behind me as I stepped through the back entrance of Emerald Peaks, the one marked "Deliveries Only." I liked that detail. It felt accurate. Elian was already waiting just inside, holding a clipboard and a knowing look. He was always professional, but this morning, his posture carried something extra. Worry, admiration, maybe both. You sure about this? He asked, voice low but firm. I pulled off my gloves and nodded. Let's see what role they write for me this year. He glanced down at the papers in his hands. Everything's confirmed per Isolde's instructions. You're listed as guest coordinator assistant. No last name. No suite reserved. Just a small room. Staff wing. I could have smiled. Perfect. We walked in silence through the back hallway, past crates of wine and folded linens stacked for the holiday crowd. The resort was already buzzing, even if the Carters hadn't arrived yet. Housekeeping was prepping floors, kitchen staff organizing tasting menus, valet lining up SUVs. No one gave me a second look. That was the plan. By the time we reached the guest records desk, I was calm, not cold, calm. There's a difference. The woman at the counter glanced up. Oh, Ms. You're with housekeeping, right? She asked, eyes flicking between her screen and the clipboard in Elian's hand. There it was. No hesitation. No double check. My family mentioned you were with staff. I nodded without pause. Correct. Assign me the room they requested. Her fingers clacked across the keyboard. Heritage wing, basement level, near the south maintenance stairwell. I signed the form and thanked her. No sarcasm, no edge. I didn't need to perform my dignity. It was already there, under every word they thought I didn't hear. As Elian led me toward the elevator, he leaned in. We can still redirect you. We have the entire top floor blocked. No, I said simply. Let it play. It was a short ride down, but every second hummed with an old familiarity, the feeling of being underestimated. I'd worn it so long, I knew its weight better than most women know silk. The hallway outside the room was dim, lined with exposed pipes and the faint, musty scent of disinfectant that never quite leaves utility spaces. My door didn't have a number, just a small brass plate that read Storage A. Inside, the room was exactly what I expected. Linoleum floor stained at the corners, a cot-style bed pressed against the wall. A tiny window, high and narrow, offered a view of the rear dumpsters and a sliver of snow-covered pavement. The radiator rattled with a sound I could only describe as indecisive. I stepped inside, set my suitcase, gray, nondescript, easy to forget, beside the door. I ran my fingers along the edge of the desk. Dust. Not surprising. The silence was familiar. Not friendly, but not hostile either, just indifferent. Like most things in my childhood, I sat on the edge of the bed, the springs squeaking beneath me, and pulled out my phone. I texted Elian, "Do not move me. Let them believe this is where I belong." He replied with a single word, "Understood." I stared at the ceiling for a while, letting the stillness fill the space between my ribs. They'd asked for this. I was simply giving them what they'd ordered, nothing more, nothing less. A few hours later, I heard the first arrivals upstairs. Laughter echoed faintly through the floorboards. I caught the rhythm of Isolda's voice, sharp and charming as ever, as she greeted the concierge like she owned the place. "Be sure to give my mother the suite with the fireplace view. She gets cold easily," she said, loud enough for even the walls to nod. "And don't worry about my sister, she's low maintenance." There it was. I didn't flinch, just laid back and stared at the ceiling. Let them play their parts. I was done auditioning. By the time I made it upstairs, the sun had dropped low enough to cast gold across the mountain peaks through the lodge's massive windows. The main lounge was warm with firelight and familiar voices, those distinct Carter cadences, confident, too loud, and layered with a kind of entitled charm. I didn't walk in with fanfare. I slipped in along the edge of the room, hugging the wood-paneled wall like a ghost who knew her way around. Most of the family was already gathered around a semicircle of chairs facing the hearth, wine glasses in hand, laughter in the air. They looked comfortable, like this had always been theirs. Isolda stood dead center, already mid-story. And then Mom turns to the waitress and says, "I don't think my daughter ordered chicken fingers. She's a Carter, not a toddler." Everyone burst out laughing. My mother gave a soft smile but looked down at her glass. My brother-in-law patted Isolda on the back like she'd just landed a courtroom win. I settled into a corner near the hallway entrance. I wasn't cold, but I crossed my arms anyway. They didn't look at me, not once. It was like I was decoration, not ugly enough to be removed, not important enough to acknowledge. Theron chimed in next. "You all remember the Yellowstone road trip? The one where we had to cancel the horseback ride because Harlow got carsick halfway there?" He didn't say it with malice, but he knew what he was doing. So did everyone else. Isolda jumped in again. "Since then, we never let Harlow plan anything again. Poor girl couldn't handle an itinerary without a meltdown." More laughter. Someone clapped. Someone else said, "She always did have a weak stomach. Couldn't take pressure." I smiled, just enough to keep the peace, just enough to not break anything. Inside, though, I felt that slow burn humiliation tighten its grip. Not the kind that explodes, the kind that simmers. I wasn't 12 anymore. I wasn't clutching a barf bag in the back of the Suburban while they made fun of me for getting motion sick on a winding road. But to them, I still was. The furniture was newer, the setting more luxurious, but the story never changed. They had turned my childhood embarrassment into a family tradition. I looked at my mother then. She was seated between Melis and Isolda, her glass resting on her knee, fingers curled loosely around the stem. Her expression was polite, even serene, like she was trying to smile without participating. She didn't speak up. She didn't stop them. And I realized for maybe the 100th time that this wasn't new. She had never defended me, not once, not when I was skipped for school awards because my cousin was louder, not when Isolda got into law school and I got into a hotel management program, and the family treated it like I had joined the custodial staff. It had always been easier for her to stay silent. Later that evening, after the laughter died down and people began drifting off toward their rooms, I caught her alone in the hallway outside the powder room. She was adjusting her scarf, preparing to say goodnight. "Mom?" I said. She turned, startled slightly. "Yes, honey?" "You never speak when they laugh at me." She looked at me, eyes blinking a little faster than normal. It's just easier to keep the peace, sweetheart. You know how your sister is. She's always been the commanding one. I nodded once. And I'm the quiet one, right? The one who's supposed to absorb it. Her lips pressed together. You've always been strong. Not strong, just used to it. There was nothing else to say, so I left her standing there. I walked slowly down the hallway, past the old family photos Isolde had brought, framed shots from Christmases past, weddings, beach trips. I wasn't in most of them, and the ones I was in, I was either off to the side or mid-blink, easy to crop. I found my way back to the stairwell, skipped the elevator, needed the silence. Descending back to the basement, I let my footsteps echo on the cold metal steps. They hadn't forgotten me. They just remembered me the way they wanted, small, forgettable, easy to mock, and they expected me to keep accepting it. I woke before sunrise, the chill of the concrete floor biting through the soles of my socks. The air in the basement didn't change much. It carried the same thin, recycled scent of bleach and forgotten linens. I washed my face in the tiny sink, letting the cold water ground me, then pulled on a thick cardigan and made my way upstairs. My family would still be asleep, but the resort was never still. The lobby was already lit in soft amber. A few staff members moved briskly behind the concierge counter, prepping coffee urns and aligning brochures. I kept my pace easy, casual, blending in. I only noticed it when I turned the corner back toward my room later that morning, holding a cup of tea. A name tag had been taped to my door. Not the elegant brass room numbers everyone else had, but a laminated card typed in bold sans serif font. No logo, no design. It read, "Housekeeping assistant, not part of Carter Group." I stared at it for a long second, just long enough to register the sickly mix of rage and disbelief rising in my throat, but not long enough to show it. I reached up, peeled it from the door, and folded it clean down the middle before slipping it into the pocket of my sweater. Behind me, I heard footsteps. Elian's voice was quiet, but firm. "I didn't authorize that." I didn't turn around. "It came from the group check-in packet, didn't it?" He hesitated. "Yes. The label was part of the documents submitted under your name, from someone in the family." "Of course it was," he exhaled. "I can remove the file from the front desk system. You don't have to play along with this." "I'm not playing," I said, still facing the door. "I'm studying." He didn't respond, and I didn't need him to. He knew what I meant. A few hours later, I walked past the concierge on my way toward the patio doors. A young staff member, probably seasonal, maybe 22 at most, glanced up from the printed itinerary she was reviewing with another guest. She paused when she saw me. "Hi, are you the new guest aide? I think your schedule's printed under Harley Carter. Looks like they had you down for gear setup at noon." Harley, that was how my name appeared on the list, misspelled, reassigned. I offered her the faintest smile. "Apparently, I'm the newest invisible relative." She laughed like it was a joke. I didn't. I kept walking until I reached the back patio. The snow had stopped falling, but left a fine dusting across the railing. A few scattered footprints told me someone else had stood there earlier, but I was alone now. I leaned against the banister, my tea cooling in my hands, and watched the trees sway gently at the edge of the property. Aspen pines, tall, stately, unmoved by petty drama. I wasn't surprised by what had happened, not really. But there was something about the officialness of it, the laminate name tag, the misprint on the itinerary, the offhand assumption that I belonged to the help and not the family, that stung more deeply than any comment made over wine the night before. It wasn't just about being ignored anymore. This was different. This was them rewriting me, reframing who I was, on paper, in person, in the eyes of people who didn't know me well enough to ask questions. They weren't just excluding me, they were redefining me. I thought back to something my father once said. I couldn't have been older than 10. I'd come home crying from a school event where someone had called me plain and forgettable. He'd crouched beside me, touched my chin, and said, "Let them write their version of you, sweetheart. Then you write your own. But do it better." It was time. I stood there for several minutes longer, watching my breath curl in the cold air, the weight of the mug anchoring my hands. Then I walked back inside, not to complain, not to beg, to prepare. Let's see what happens when I rewrite them. That evening came with a slick quiet, the kind that blankets over noise but leaves the tension humming beneath. The snow outside had begun to melt just slightly, softening into a slush that cracked faintly under polished boots. I'd changed out of my cardigan and into a black dress, simple, long-sleeved, barely tailored. I knew how to blend when I needed to. The banquet hall was lit up in warm tones, gold and ivory everywhere. I paused before entering, let the chatter filter through the walls. From just inside the doors, I could already hear Isolde's voice, brisk, assured, dominating the space like she'd paid for every chair. "Make sure my parents are by the fireplace," she said to a young hostess. "And please, don't seat Harlow near the dessert display. Last time she camped out there like it was a buffet line." More laughter followed. I stepped in and handed my place card to the hostess. She glanced at it, scanned the layout board, then pointed to a small table near the kitchen swing doors. "Miss Carter, you're seated. Just here." Of course I was. I thanked her quietly and made my way across the floor. The placement wasn't just an oversight, it was a message. The closest table to the restroom sign, behind the line of service carts, tucked into a corner that didn't quite catch the glow of the center chandelier. It was the kind of seat you gave to a +1 from a broken engagement. I sat down, adjusted my silverware, and waited. One of the resort photographers began calling out names. "Can I get the Carters up front for the family shot?" he asked cheerfully. I watched as the room shifted, chairs pushed back, glasses abandoned, voices rising. Isolde stepped forward first, followed by Nathan, then Aunt Milas, and a parade of cousins. I caught my mother's eye across the room. She looked right at me, then followed the others without a word. No one said my name. I stayed in my seat. They all lined up near the stone fireplace, posed with bright teeth and easy posture. The photographer snapped 3 quick frames. Not one glance in my direction. It was oddly liberating in a way. They didn't crop me out of the photo. I never made it in. Dinner began. Servers moved between tables, laying plates of roasted lamb and garlic-whipped potatoes. Wine glasses were refilled faster than anyone could notice. I kept mine half full, always half. Isolde stood halfway through the meal and tapped her glass with a spoon. "I just want to say," she began, smiling with a warmth I knew was rehearsed, "this weekend means a lot to us, to the Carters. It's about legacy. It's about loyalty. And none of this would be possible without what we've all built, together." A few people clapped. My mother dabbed her eyes with a cloth napkin. "We've always believed in showing up," Isolde continued, "in doing the work, and I think this dinner, this entire reunion, proves just how strong our roots are." There it was, a speech meant for me. Every word of that toast had been lifted from a draft I wrote a month earlier. I'd typed it at night, sitting by my window in silence, just in case they remembered I existed and asked me to speak. They didn't, but someone had read it. Someone had passed it on. Someone had watched me from the edge and decided I'd be better served cold and silent. I didn't blink, didn't flinch. I took another sip of wine, slow and steady. Later, as the plates were cleared and the guests began to disperse into smaller huddles, I caught Isolde alone by the corridor leading to the coat room. She was reapplying lipstick in her phone reflection, smiling to herself like she'd just signed a new client. I walked up beside her, waited until she noticed me. She didn't look up. "Enjoy your seat by the mop closet," she murmured. I tilted my head. "Be careful who you erase." She finally turned toward me, brow lifted, lipstick still in hand. "Excuse me?" "Some of us are keeping score." Her laugh was low, amused. "Still playing the victim, huh?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I turned, walked away, and pulled out my phone. My message to Elian was short. "Prepare the real agenda." After I hit send, I didn't look at the screen again. The message to Elian was already echoing in my head. Clean, surgical. Prepare the real agenda. A directive, not a request. It had taken me years to learn that kind of clarity. The next morning, sunlight pushed into the basement room through that ridiculous sliver of a window, as if it, too, had to squeeze past the trash bins to get in. I was halfway through buttoning my shirt when my phone buzzed. Group thread, family. Against my better judgment, I tapped it open. Theron had posted, time-stamped, 8:07 a.m. "Don't forget to refill the towels. Housekeeping." 3 laugh reacts followed. One from Isolde, one from Nathan, one from my Aunt Malis. I stared at it for a long moment, not because I was surprised, no, that phase had passed, but because something inside me paused, not from pain, from precision. I didn't reply, I didn't even frown. I simply hit delete on the thread and placed the phone face down on the tiny desk. I had kept quiet. I had watched. I had documented the roles they assigned me: maid, burden, nobody. But now I was done folding the towels of their stories. Done folding, done serving, done absorbing. Later that morning, while the family joined a snowmobile tour arranged by Isolde herself, because of course she needed another activity to organize, I walked up to the administration wing. The hallway leading to the office was empty, the air warmer than the guest floors. I knew every inch of this part of the building. I had spent nights here 3 years ago, at a time when Emerald Peaks was one signature away from collapse. Back then, the resort was bleeding money from a bad winter season, poor management, and a failed partnership. The previous owners were in freefall. They called me in because I had capital and a reputation for reviving boutique properties. No one in the family knew, not then, not now. They just assumed this resort had great taste. They didn't know it almost didn't exist. Elian had been the only manager willing to stay through the transition. Everyone else jumped ship. He stayed for one reason. I didn't treat him like a backup plan. One night, sitting in the tiny conference room with a stack of financial projections, he asked me, "Why not tell them? Let them know you're the reason this place still has walls." I had smiled, small, tired, because they never care who builds the house, only who hosts the party. I thought about that now, standing outside the very office I'd once used to save the place. I knocked once before opening the door. Elian was already there, seated behind the desk. He looked up, expression unreadable, but I knew him well enough to see the alertness beneath his calm. "It's time," I said simply. He nodded once. "Tier 1 protocol?" "Yes, full rate, no comps, no family discounts." He didn't blink. "Understood." As I turned to leave, I paused. "Also, pull the receipts. Everything they've charged so far. I want it clean, itemized, and ready by this evening." He leaned back slightly, studying me. "You want to hand it over personally?" "No," I said. "I'll do one better." Back in my room, I opened the closet. I'd brought one garment that wasn't neutral. It wasn't loud either, but it meant something. A charcoal black blazer, not corporate, not apologetic. It was sharp enough to speak for me and silent enough not to beg for attention. I put it on over a white blouse, tied my hair back, and stood in front of the mirror that barely reflected anything in this dim, forgotten room. If they want me to act like staff, I murmured to my reflection, I'll give them the most expensive service they've ever had. I didn't rush. The hallway was quiet, its usual rhythm interrupted by the shift between pre-dinner drinks and the second family meal. Everyone was either at the bar, comparing ski bruises, or getting ready to celebrate themselves in the dining room again. This time, I would meet them at the front, not as the forgotten, not as the maid. The elevator doors opened onto the lobby with a soft chime. I stepped out slowly, heels deliberate on the polished floor. The black blazer framed me like armor, every button in place, collar sharp, sleeves sitting right where I wanted them. I didn't need anything louder than that. I made my way toward the marble center of the room. The chandelier above glittered. My family stood to one side, some sipping wine, some laughing at things that weren't funny. They didn't notice me at first, not until Elian appeared from behind the concierge desk and strode toward me with the poise of a man fully briefed. He stopped 2 paces from where I stood and said loud enough for every nearby ear to catch it, "Good evening, Ms. Carter. The staff is ready for your inspection." The sound snapped through the room like dry wood cracking in fire. Chairs shifted, heads turned. Someone let out a short, confused chuckle. Isolde, halfway through a pour of red wine, stiffened. The stem of her glass slipped from her fingers, shattering at her feet. I didn't flinch. "Ms. Carter?" someone whispered behind me. Elian gestured respectfully toward the concierge. "Would you like to begin with the lobby presentation, or shall we move directly to guest services?" I smiled, barely. "I think I'll begin right here." The silence that followed had weight. It wasn't just surprise, it was recognition, recalibration, realization. I faced them fully now. "Let me introduce myself properly," I said, scanning each of their faces. "I'm Harlow Carter, CEO of Carter Resorts, owner of Emerald Peaks." Dead quiet. Even the server who had been wiping down the bar froze, towel in hand mid-air. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "You've spent the weekend enjoying this place, complaining about room views, changing dinner menus, rearranging schedules. All of it came through me, approved by me, covered by me." Malis blinked, mouth slightly open. My mother sat down slowly on the edge of a velvet armchair, eyes wide but saying nothing, again. Isolde finally found her voice. "This is some kind of joke," she said, though her tone didn't match her words. She sounded like someone trying to convince herself the ship wasn't sinking while her shoes filled with water. I continued, "You know, it's funny. For people who pride themselves on details, you missed quite a few." Nathan muttered something to Theron, who frowned. Vera, my mother, still hadn't spoken. "Elian?" I turned to him without taking my eyes off them. He stepped forward again, carrying a small stack of white envelopes. "As requested," he said, and handed the first one to Isolde, then one to Malis, then Theron, and so on. "What is this?" Isolde hissed. I answered for him. "Your bills. Full rate, premium package, no discounts." "Are you out of your mind?" she snapped, her voice sharpening. "You can't. This is extortion." "No," I said calmly. "This is the true cost of what you assumed was owed to you. The 5-star meals, the suites, the spa bookings, the private transport from the airport, the wine cellar you drained last night." Theron opened his envelope and went pale. "That's not a real number," he said. "It is," Elian replied. "And your card is already on file." I turned to leave, not because I was finished, but because they were. There was nothing else I needed to say, nothing they could argue without proving my point further. Just before I reached the elevator, I paused. This resort, I said without turning back, was on the brink of collapse 3 years ago. I saved it, alone, while you were all busy pretending I didn't exist. I pressed the button. And tonight, you paid full price for pretending one last time. The doors slid open. I stepped inside. As they closed behind me, the only sound I heard was the soft clink of someone setting down their wine glass, very, very carefully. The next morning, the lobby smelled of espresso and panic. I stood near the back exit, just out of view, sipping a quiet cup of coffee as I watched my family unravel in real time. Some paced with clipped footsteps, phones glued to their ears. Others whispered in huddled tones around the check-in desk, pointing at envelopes, at Elian, and occasionally throwing confused glances toward the hallway. The elegant ease they wore like armor the day before had cracked wide open. Half of them were scrambling to leave early, bags half-packed, coats thrown over arms, lips tight with the shock of being held accountable. But the thing is, their cards were already on file. And Emerald Peaks, under my direction, didn't process refunds on premium tier bookings. Not for guests who treated staff like wallpaper. Not for family who never saw me standing there. Isolde was standing near the concierge desk, arguing with Elian in a voice just a bit too loud to be called discreet. "I don't care what system you use," she snapped. "There's no way this number is correct." Elian, in his usual calm, professional tone, responded, "It's been verified, Ms. Carter. The rate reflects all services used. Spa, private car, additional wine orders, and the snowmobile excursion yesterday." Isolde's jaw tensed. We were promised a family rate. I stepped forward then, not to interfere, but because I was done hiding behind corners. That promise came from someone who assumed family was a shield, not a responsibility. Isolde turned, startled, and found me already looking at her. Across the room, I caught sight of Theron dropping his keys as he tried to juggle a suitcase and 2 phones. He muttered under his breath, "Ungrateful. You give people an inch?" Vera was sitting alone near the fireplace, her hands clasped tightly together on her lap. She saw me, hesitated, then stood and slowly approached. "Harlow," she began, voice soft. "I didn't know. I wish I had." Her eyes shimmered, not with drama, but with something older, regret, maybe, or shame she didn't want to name. I met her eyes evenly. "I don't need you to know. I needed you to speak." She nodded, small and hesitant, like she wasn't sure she was allowed. The rest of the morning passed like fog, thick, slow, and weighted with things no one dared say aloud. By mid-morning, Isolde sent a message through Elian requesting a private meeting. "The family wants to clarify things," she wrote. I agreed, not because I needed the apology, but because I wanted to watch them try. We met in a side room near the resort's wine cellar, a place meant for tastings and quiet deals. Isolde sat at the head of the table, Vera beside her. Melis, Nathan, and Theron filled the remaining chairs, avoiding eye contact. Isolde cleared her throat. "We've talked, and we think maybe this weekend didn't go how anyone expected." I raised an eyebrow. "Did it not?" She glanced at the others, then back to me. "If something we did, if something I did, made you feel less?" I offered. She hesitated. "Yes, less." I sat forward slightly. "Let's not pretend. You saw who I was. You chose to see less." Silence thickened the room. No one jumped in. No one defended. "I'm not angry anymore," I said, voice steady. "But I'm not available either." Isolde opened her mouth to speak again, but I was already rising. "There's nothing left to clarify," I added. "You don't owe me anything." "But you can't take from me anymore either." I walked to the door, paused, and looked back once, just enough to leave a mark, not a wound. "Some doors don't need to be locked," I said. "They're just never walked through again." And I left, not loudly, not with slammed doors or slammed hearts. Just done. By the time the last of them checked out, the resort had slipped into a familiar stillness, like a house after company leaves. Their voices no longer echoed through the halls, their laughter no longer clung to the walls. The tension they brought with them had left too, but in its place was a quiet that felt earned. I made myself a cup of jasmine tea in the suite's kitchenette. No room service tray, no staff. Just me and the soft hiss of water boiling, the snow falling outside the picture windows, and the warmth of solitude instead of performance. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clear, clean, the way you do after a deep rain, not because anything sparkled, but because everything unnecessary had washed away. I walked barefoot to the fireplace and lit it. No flick of a remote, no hotel automation, just wood, matches, and flame. Real, simple, mine. There were no notifications on my phone. No apologies, no last attempts to smooth things over. And honestly, I didn't need them. I wasn't waiting for acknowledgement anymore. I reached into the bottom drawer of the old writing desk near the window. I hadn't opened it since I'd arrived. Inside, where I left it months ago when I last stayed here for a winter board meeting, was a pale blue envelope with a name scrawled across it in familiar penmanship, Dad's. It had been 2 years since he passed. Quietly, quickly. Lung cancer, stage 4 by the time anyone caught it. He didn't tell the family until the end was near, but he told me first, trusted me to keep his secret, to carry his calm when the others couldn't. This letter had come in the mail 3 days after his funeral. No return address, but I knew that script. The heavy-handed capital H, the uneven line spacing. He'd written it when he knew time was short. I sat down on the edge of the couch, let the envelope rest in my palm for a second longer, then opened it. The paper was cream-colored. No letterhead, no drama, just him. "If the world ever tries to erase you, Harlow, remember, I saw you. I always did." My throat tightened, but the tears that came weren't sharp. They didn't burn. They just arrived, like something soft being released. I read the line again, aloud this time. "I saw you. I always did." It's amazing what one person's voice can undo, what one sentence can repair. Not because it fixes everything, but because it reminds you you're not crazy, that you weren't invisible, that someone, once, looked and didn't turn away. I folded the letter carefully and placed it on the mantel above the fire. No frame, just presence. Then I opened my laptop. The screen blinked awake to the last document I had left open weeks ago. A pitch deck for a new boutique property in New Mexico. I skimmed the numbers, adjusted a few details, and changed the footer. From Carter Holdings, LLC, to Harlow Carter, CEO. No initials, no aliases, just my name. I clicked save. They had tried to write me out, had spent years reshaping me into a version easier to tolerate, easier to dismiss. But I had never needed their story. I've always had my own. Sometimes the most powerful statement isn't spoken, it's made in action. This story isn't just about revenge, it's about reclaiming your voice when others have worked hard to silence it. So here's the question. Have you ever let people write your story for you, until one day you took the pen back? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more real, raw stories just like this one.